In today's episode, you will hear about the great lengths a Master Patrolman goes for love, his hidden talent from childhood, and why he believes everyone should own a horse. Greetings and welcome to Your Positive Lens, where we hope to adjust your focus so you see that members of your local law enforcement community are not much different than you and me. I'm your host, Scott T., and this is episode 3, A Patrolman's Hidden Talent. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for all the latest updates. In addition to Spotify, you can now follow and listen to Your Positive Lens on Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music. Be sure to add your comments and provide us feedback on today's episode. Today's guest, in getting to know your local Leo, enjoyed a successful law enforcement career that spanned 35 years. He served in various roles, including detective and master patrolman, officially retiring from the Albuquerque Police Department in December 2021. Please welcome to the Your Positive Lens podcast, retired Master Patrolman Larry Smyth.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Master Patrolman. Let me ask you, would you prefer to go by Patrolman Smith? Larry, how would you like to be introduced on today's show as we go throughout?
Just, you know what? At this point, I'm retired, so just Larry's fine.
Excellent. We can do that, Larry. Real quick, Larry, I know you live in Albuquerque, actually in an area of town that received a bit of snow. Tell us about that experience you've encountered over the last couple of days.
I live out east of town, and we've had probably 18 to 24 inches of snow, so it's been kind of interesting out here just navigating and taking care of the livestock and just getting in and out sometimes. And, of course, one of my favorite things to do is go out and pull people out because people get stuck. So that's kind of fun. So I spent about half a day yesterday doing that.
Very nice. For those who don't know, when Larry says the east side of town, it's there's Albuquerque, and east side of town is not just east of Albuquerque, but it's east of Albuquerque through the mountains on the other side. And the Sandia Mountains there provide almost a buffer between Albuquerque and the east side. So where they get dumped with 18 to 24 inches of snow, we get dumped with 4 to 6 inches of snow. So we appreciate the mountain range. So, the mission of our show incorporates the concept that members of local law enforcement community are not much different than those that they serve. And so we hope through today's discussion and what we'll be having today is that people will begin to see and continue to see similarities between the everyday lives of law enforcement and those in the community. So what I'd like to start off with for you here today is, you spent, like I said, 35 years in law enforcement, a very long, successful career, but what inspired you to ultimately choose a career in law enforcement?
I was raised in Albuquerque. I went to high school here. I went to West Mesa. And I moved to Texas to seek my fame and fortune. And actually, I did pretty well. I was vice president of a large corporation over there. But most of my family lived here, and I kept reading about Albuquerque, and they were number one in crime, and they were just seemed like they were headed down the wrong road. And I was talking to my dad, and Dad basically said, well, if you're not willing to do something about it, you can't complain about it. And it kind of struck a chord with me. And so I left being executive vice president and came back over here and became a police officer.
So you were truly inspired to make a difference in the Albuquerque community.
I was. And I know it kind of sounds like a canned response, but of the hundreds and thousands of police officers I've taught all over the United States, I truly believe the vast, vast majority of police officers want to make a difference. They want to help people. That's why they do it. I mean, for years and years, it certainly wasn't a pay. Now they're paying a little bit better than they used to be. But when I first started, I literally could get food stamps. because we were below minimum wage when we started. So you did it because you wanted to, because you thought that was the best thing for you, and you did it. You did it to help. You had to take your rewards by helping people. It certainly wasn't a monetary reward.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the food stamp thing, I was not aware of that was the case, but it is true. People don't realize that law enforcement, the reward is the service and helping others. The part of the work that gets glorified is apprehending criminals and making arrests. That's the necessary part of the job, but that part of the job allows the people to live free, safe, and happy, and that's ultimately what you're trying to do, provide that service to those individuals. I appreciate that. That's amazing to know, like, that what inspired you, and like, when you talk around the country, you saw the same message, which just only confirms that no matter where you live, law enforcement kind of still follows the same mantra. Now, in 35 years, you probably saw a lot of things, accomplished a lot of great things, but for you personally, what would you say was the greatest professional accomplishment during that 35-year career?
Thanks, Scott. I was lucky. I was Officer of the Month. I got a lot of awards, as it were. But I think the thing that meant the most to me was I was able to be part of new units, the emergency response team, the gang unit. We didn't have a gang unit in Albuquerque, and I was one of the first 4 that went to there. Metro, which was a fast response unit that works 24 hours a day, and horses. We had a horse unit when I first came on, but I've been over there off and on my entire career. I've trained the horses, I've trained the riders, and just to see the growth and the acceptance from the citizens, and to see I hate to use the word stats, but to see the difference, that's really, in a lot of ways, that's the only way that the city can tell if you're doing any good. But to see that you were making a difference, and that these units are still all around, except for Metro. But ERT, gangs units, horse unit, they're all still there, and they're still working well. So I'm very, very proud that I got to be a plank owner in those units. I think that to me is what I really am proud of.
Yeah, and that's the uniqueness of it. It wasn't a singular accomplishment, but it was the fact that through your experience and your time there, you were able to help be a part of multiple groups, and being able to be a startup of a group, that in itself is an accomplishment. Like that, and now seeing that success still exists is really a great thing for you, because when you look around the community, you know you've been a part of many of those from the days they first launched.
I think it was to me just because you recognized the need, you presented it, and the city said, or the department said, you know what, you're right, that's a need. Let's go move forward and see if we can help out the citizens.
I want to follow up, though, Larry, on a couple of things you mentioned. We'll start with the last part that you've been mentioning, helping citizens. A lot of times law enforcement we talked about is always stereotyped into arresting people. But there's a lot of things that law enforcement does to help the common everyday person that people don't think about on the everyday. They don't think about the small things that law enforcement does because, one, it's not advertised. Two, law enforcement officers don't brag about it. They just do it because they're being genuinely good people. Can you think of something that you've maybe done for someone in the community that no one would think a law enforcement officer would do?
I think, yes. And I think that most officers consistently do stuff like that. I built a wheelchair ramp for one of the students one time because they couldn't find the money and the paperwork was terrible, and they were trying to get, to wade their way through the paperwork, and it finally just became easier just to go buy the stuff and build a wheelchair ramp so they could get out of their house and down to their carport and get in their car and go to school. When we were with horses, we prided ourselves in taking the horses for special things, for cancer patients, for birthdays, for people that were having problems, for just to go to a neighborhood that was trying to get back on its feet and just to show our presence and mingle with them and let them see the horses and stuff. I think most police officers go above and beyond, especially in helping people find their way through the maze of paperwork. That there are a lot of programs out there, but a lot of people aren't aware of the programs, and once they find out about it, they have no idea how to get started in it. And as a police officer, you have the unique ability of having phone calls returned anyhow. And so we consistently do that. When I was an SRO, that was probably 40 to 50% of my job, was just helping people find programs that would benefit them and their family.
Yeah, that's outstanding, especially the whole wheelchair part of there. Is, the amount of red tape. We know that these documents are drawn up by attorneys, and many people aren't going to be able to decipher it. Like this, the fact that you can make a phone call, get a response, and then cut through red tape where it's applicable and can be done, and help a member of the community. In this case, helping someone who ultimately, because they're in a wheelchair, almost became homebound because they had no way to navigate outside their front door. Because we all know going down a 3-inch step in a wheelchair without a ramp is not the most safe thing or comfortable thing for someone to do. So I appreciate you doing that. That's amazing. All right. You mentioned a lot of the horses. Now you mentioned you train the horses, you work the horses. A lot of police work brings a lot of stress, and I understand that many officers will seek ways to let off steam, let off stress, have favorite hobbies. Was working with the horses one of those things for you? Because you mentioned a few times that you trained them and then you guys bring them out to help see patients. So were horses a natural part of your life?
They have been. I've never not had a horse. Horses have been a part of my life my entire life. And one of the things about being a police officer is a horse is honest. I mean, they give back to you what you give to them. And so for me, being able to handle horses and work with horses and train horses, and as you know, I worked at a horse rescue, and we trained horses out there, and being able to calm yourself and just put everything else out of your mind, which when you're working with a new horse, especially an abused horse, you have to be able to do. That was just kind of a way to get away from the entire world. Because when I'm in a round pen with a horse that's especially a horse that's been abused or a horse that's wild, there is nothing else going through my head except that horse and the connection that I'm trying to make with that horse. And the other really cool thing about working with horses the way I've done is I don't know how many people I've taught to ride or taught to handle horses or shown them what a wonderful thing a horse is for your life and for your family's life. If I could do it, everybody would have a horse. Because it just, I always tell people to put your heart in your hand and reach out to the horse. And I think that's really what you have to do. And horses are just wonderful for putting you in that mindset that, you know what, the world's okay. It's just you and I'm not going to hurt you. We've just got to trust each other. And so for me, that's really cool. And it's kept me sane my whole life. So I don't know what I'd do without them.
Yeah, and I think the part you mentioned there is you have to be calm around the horse. You can't. So if you're there stressed from work, the horse is not going to react to you in a positive way. You need to react together. So just an innate being of you and the horse as one at that point, it forces you to remove that stress at the moment, or it puts you in a way to condition you to remove that stress. You can have the best relationship with that horse you're either naturally working with because it's your own, or one that you're training for somebody else. You literally have a built-in stress relief if you want to be able to successfully have a relationship with that horse.
Absolutely.
I once saw a picture years ago And you have to tell me if horses think this way. So there was a picture of a person walking down the street, and it showed a bubble above the head about all the things they're thinking about. It was work, jobs, financial budgets, the day's life. All these things were clouded in the person's head walking down the street. And then the screen next to it, they showed a dog walking down the street. And the only thing in that dog's mind was the tree in front of them. Do horses have that same mentality? If you were standing with your horse there, are they distracted by all the day's events, or are they kind of in the moment and just seeing what's in front of them?
Horses are a little bit of both, because they're a prey animal. So, they think everything out there is going to eat them. But
that's not the greatest feeling to have every day.
Yeah. But on the other hand, once you make a connection with the horse, what you'll find is that you have that horse's full attention. And that's what you look for. That's what you're looking at, their eyes and at their ears and at their body language. And it's amazing once you get that connection with the horse. And the other thing about horses is there's a lot of correlation to handling a horse and being a police officer, because in being a police officer, you have to be able to put everything else out of your mind, your bills and your family, and your car's not working, and how am I going to make the next month's payment, and do your job. You can't be thinking about all of this other stuff. You have to be able to focus on your job. And to me, I guess that's part of why I enjoyed being a police officer, is it's kind of all-encompassing. It's total focus. It's opening yourself up to where you're reading the person. You're seeing you're hearing not only what they're saying, but you're seeing how they're saying it. And you're trying to understand what is really the problem that's going on here. And I think that's the two of those really correlate in that aspect.
Yeah, that's a interesting correlation between the horse and, we'll call it the perpetrator, right? You're trying to read both of them and working together. And I never thought about it that way. And I guess that's why the importance of, the horse psychology, understanding the horse behavior. Same thing with the human psychology, understanding the behavior, how they're standing, how they're positioned, how they're speaking, all those pieces. I never thought about the correlation between the two, but it's really pretty spot on. That's why you have 35 years in law enforcement and working with it, and I don't. You mentioned in there, Larry, that officers have to be able to set aside all the things going on in their life. But can you tell us about time? Did you ever experience a level of personal tragedy that you went through during your 35 years as a police officer? And how did you manage that while going through the career? Because sometimes things are so difficult, but yet, like you said, you have to set them aside.
I have several times. I don't think any police officer that's been out on the streets, especially in a city like Albuquerque that's big and it's 24/7. You deal with calls that are horrible. You can't imagine people doing stuff to each other. And you deal with accidents, and you deal with children, and you deal with things that are just horrific. And to me, in 35 years, I've only got 2 calls that I occasionally dream about. And I haven't in a long time. I probably will now because I'm thinking about it. But, to me, the way that I got through them is it was all encompassing. You trained hard, you studied, you learned, you listened to people who knew more than you did, and you were trying to be your very best every minute that you were wearing that uniform. And so when you went to one of these calls, you did everything that you knew. You didn't cut any corners. You didn't give yourself any slack. You pushed yourself to be as good as you could be. And at the end of that call, good, bad, or indifferent, and some of them were definitely bad, you looked yourself in the mirror and you thought, did I do everything I could have done? And if you could answer yes to that, then you can move on. And so for me, that was, I didn't, excuse me, APD has a really good support system. They have counselors and psychiatrists and such that you can go see if you need to. For me, that I didn't utilize them. I mean, there were some calls I had to go. You're required to go talk to them. But for me, the thing that got me through day to day, and even those major things that you wish you'd never seen, was just the fact that I could look at myself and say I did the best I could have, and I didn't make any mistakes. And you know, I think the worst ones are where you feel like that you could have done something else.
Yeah, we could have done more, right?
Yeah, why didn't I think of this? And that's why, you know, in APD, again, I've got to give them kudos. They have a huge training program, and that's why you continue to study, and that's why you continue to go to classes, and that's why you continue to work with people who are experts in those fields. And I don't know an expert. I'm certified as an expert in federal and state court, and I don't know an expert anywhere that's not willing to share with you everything they know. And so I just think I think that's what kept me going so long as a police officer, is it was a constant learning experience. It was a constant getting better, pushing yourself. It was never dull. You know, you never got to a point to where you were like, I got this. You know, and at least for me, it was just a constant learning and trying to be better all the time. And I think that most officers are that way. And again, you know, I surround myself, and I think the people I hung out with, we were all that way. You didn't want to be mediocre. You wanted to be the best. And to be the best required an effort. And so the people I chose to hang out with were the best. And I would happily help teach anybody that I possibly could. But those people, when I came on, I picked the people to be my mentors. I picked the best people in that particular field, whatever the field happened to be. And those are the people I gravitated to, and those are the people I approached for help. And you know, said, hey, make me better. And without exception, everyone I approached did so. And so luckily, I became a teacher for Northwestern Traffic Institute, part of the cadre. And so I got to travel around the United States teaching. And you got to spread that message a little bit. And I think that in anything, it doesn't matter whether you're a welder or a janitor. It doesn't matter. You find the person that is the best, and you try and emulate them. You try and become as good as they are, and eventually, hopefully, you can become better than they are, because that's how things progress, is you just consistently try and be better and better and better. And again, I think that's why I was so proud about, you know, some of the units that we started, is that was just trying to be better. That's all that was. And
I think your point there is that, you know, it doesn't matter what your career profession is, what you do in life. It's who you surround yourself with. Ultimately, you end up emulating or getting better than, right? And if you surround yourself with bad people, you're going to go down a bad path usually. If you surround yourself with people who are positive influences around you, you would generally aspire to be like or better than them. And that's like in law enforcement, a welder, janitor, a teacher, it doesn't matter what profession it is, or just everyday life, who your friends around you could lead you the wrong direction or the right direction.
Absolutely.
You know, something you mentioned too, and I come from the higher education industry, and you know, you're always trying to do things to benefit the students. And you mentioned at the end of the day in law enforcement, if you look in the mirror and your reflection looking back at you, you feel you've done everything possible. It allows you to sleep at night. And directors earlier in my career, the first directors that I ever worked with, brought to me, they said, as long as you do what's best for the student without violating compliance or ethics, you would generally be doing the right thing. And you know, I've been in higher education now over 15 years. And I can honestly say I've never had a situation where I couldn't fall asleep at night, because I've always felt I've tried to do the right thing. Have there been something that I wish I could do better? Of course. But I've done everything I can within that realm. And it just makes it a little bit easier because we always want to do as much as we can.
Absolutely agree with you. And we're going to fail. I mean, we're going to make mistakes.
Correct.
But so long as you learn from it, and you can still look yourself in the mirror and say, well, I'm never going to do that again.
True. So true.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, I think that's a sign of a good person.
100%. So move on to a little more fun topics, right? We talked about some of the tragedies, some of the challenges, but, a lot of times, people don't think about the everyday human element. I mean, we talked about some of those things already, but then there's other things that, involve law enforcement that also show that they're human, just like the people they serve. And so if you and I were to hop in the truck, Larry, go for a ride, what type of music would we be listening to?
I guess I'd have to say country, but I've got a background in jazz and my mom sang opera, so I'm really pretty much good with anything. But if you turn on my radio, Garth Brooks is going to be on it.
All right, not Chris Gaines Garth Brooks when he tried to go to rock singer, but Garth Brooks like his country albums.
Yeah, probably so.
All right, but you mentioned you have a background in jazz, so are you telling us there's a special talent there that retired patrolman from APD has, where he's got jazz instruments being played or dancing, singing? What are you not telling us about that jazz background?
Well, like I say, Mom sang opera. She was a music teacher, so I played the trombone in school, played in the jazz band and the symphonic orchestra in the City of Albuquerque Orchestra. I actually had a full scholarship on the trombone.
That's awesome.
But I've always piddled with the guitar. I've never Mom wanted to teach me, and it was one of those things that's like, no, I'll learn it on my own. So, I mean, I've had a guitar for probably 35, 40 years, and I still don't know how to play it, but I like to mess around with it. So
you probably should have listened to Mom when she wanted to give you lessons 35 years ago.
Yeah, I wish I would have.
Yeah. So as trombone, I don't see the correlation to the trombone and law enforcement, but the fact that, that's one of those things. It's a hidden talent that I'm sure if someone you pulled over were not thinking about, Officer Smith here can go home and play the trombone. They probably were not thinking that at all.
No, most of my good friends would never think that either.
So that is pretty cool. So that's really nice. So I'm guessing if you gave it a chance, being that, DNA travels through the parents, Mom could sing opera, you probably got a little bit of tune in you too.
A little bit, maybe.
So if we're driving down the road and we see you singing Garth Brooks, you might actually be carrying the note.
I might be carrying the note. I mean, again, with Mom, we sang. I was even choir director at my church for a while, so sometimes I can carry a tune, but it's been a long time. I have to warn you.
Well, maybe some future episode we'll bring you back, and we'll get some of the officers from around the country to do a little quartet together with a little special show. We'll do a retired quartet. We'll see if we can pull that off maybe down the line. Right. So, we're hanging out and someone offered you a salty food or a sweet dessert. Which one do you pick?
Salty.
Salty, all right. So, salty food, hanging out. Are we going to grab a good book off the shelf, or are we going to put a good movie on TV?
Book. I can lose myself in a book. Movies, not so much. Although I like watching movies, but a book is just, it's usually a quiet place. It's just me. I've spent a lot of time growing up out in the pasture with the horses reading a book. So,
is there an all-time favorite book that you would read over and over, or one that you'd recommend that the listeners would maybe look into reading themselves?
One I really enjoyed was a book called Monty Walsh, and that's because I got to meet Schaefer, who wrote it. He's a Southwestern author, and there's nothing, you're not going to come away with any great ideas from it. But to me, it's just a story about a cowboy, and it kind of struck a chord with me, and I've probably read it 4 or 5 times.
But I think the cool part is meeting the author of the book and having a conversation with him probably even makes the book even better, because now you almost have an insight into his way of thinking, what led to the writing of that book.
And I met him in high school. And he told me, I'll never forget, he told me before he wrote it, and he's written a number of books, but he told me before he wrote a book, he knew what the last line of the book was. And
so he knew the last line before the first line.
He knew the last line before the first line. So
very interesting. I wonder how many other authors take that same approach.
I don't know. I mean, I've got a really good friend who's an author, and I watched him struggle to write a book for probably 3 years, and he jumped around from beginning to end to middle so I don't think all of the authors do it that way for sure.
Yeah, I think writing a book can be probably one of the most challenging things for someone to do, especially when you have multiple characters in there and you're trying to remember characters' lines and what they were talking about, what they were thinking about, and bringing that story from start to finish and bringing all those elements together. The ability of a writer is impressive.
It is very impressive.
So I'm going to ask you, you mentioned the trombone, you mentioned jazz, maybe some singing in there. Did you do sports as well, or was sports kind of the back burner and your sport was more or less working with the horses and roping the horses? Were you a jock also in school?
I wouldn't call myself a jock. My brother was a jock. He was all-city, all-state, United Press International. I played 8 years of football. I played first string. I got a couple scholarship offers on it. But it wasn't a passion for me, unfortunately. The only sport that I've ever found to be a passion was I was in Taekwondo and loved martial arts, competed in it till I was 28, I guess. 1984, I won the nationals. And that was really the last competition I did, because once I became a police officer, it was kind of weird, because when I became a police officer, I had to completely get away from that for a couple of years, because that's not how we're trained. So I couldn't be doing, all the stuff I learned in Taekwondo on the street. So I just completely quit it for a couple of years.
But you retired as a champion. 28, you got your national championship, and then you went to law enforcement.
Yeah. In 1984, I won the nationals.
That is pretty cool. Where did they host the nationals? I'm going to ask.
The nationals that year were in Oklahoma City.
That'd be an experience. So the number of individuals converging in Oklahoma City, which 84, there probably wasn't the largest city in America, but yet you have these people coming from all the country to do Taekwondo competition there.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I think it was because some of Chuck Norris was out of Oklahoma City. That's where his Century Martial Arts was. And a lot of the bigger teachers were in the southeastern part of the country, which I don't know why that surprises me, but they were. There were some in California, but the vast majority of them were in the southeastern part of the country.
Warm weather all year round, probably.
Yeah, maybe so. And like I say, Chuck Norris at the time was huge, and he was a big influence on a lot of that.
And amazingly, he still looks like he's in great shape today. He's many years past his prime, but he still looks good out there.
He is. He does. And I got to put a plug in for him. I met him a couple of times. In fact, I met him in high school too, but then I met him later on when I was fighting. And he is the nicest, most genuine person I've met. Just no ego, just a very nice guy.
That's great to hear, because usually you don't hear that about celebrities or those who are famous in either TV shows, movies, or whatnot, athletes. It's just it's the complete opposite. So to hear that about Chuck Norris that's great to hear. And I guess the other side of it is, don't get him mad.
Yeah, probably so. I don't think he's got anything to prove to anybody, so he can afford to be that way.
Yeah, absolutely true. So we got singing, we have football, we have scholarships, we have instruments. But let's pick up, Larry, and say, starting all over. We're going to put you in a new place, new town, new city, wherever it might be. What is the career you choose if it wasn't law enforcement?
I think I would have been a rancher. And my reasoning for that is it's kind of selfish, I guess, because as a rancher, you're kind of out there by yourself. The problems of the world don't, you're not carrying them on your shoulders every day. You get to raise your family kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and you have a lot less influence from outside sources there. And I think that's what I would have done.
It's safe to say, if you're working with cattle, if you're working with the horses, you're back to that element also, like you said, that it's you becoming one with them. And obviously you're not training cattle the way you're training horses, but just the fact that you're still working together out there, and it's you in the countryside. And
that's true. And like I say, animals are honest, all animals. And I love that. There's no guile to them. They are what they are.
Almost loyal to a fault, too, because their loyalty to humans sometimes gets them hurt, because the humans are the one that causes them more pain. They don't cause it on themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what would you say then, going through your career, or even prior or after the career, would you say the best personal advice that you received from someone that you think listeners could benefit from?
I think my dad told it to me first, and then I've heard it from people I admired throughout my career, throughout my life, and that is, don't complain about something unless you're willing to step up and try and change it. And I think if you see a problem, step up and do something about it. Don't just sit back and say, well, I wish somebody would do something about that. Do something about it.
Yeah, be the person that has to do something rather than wait for others to do it for you.
Exactly. It just sitting around complaining doesn't do anything but make you feel bad and everybody you complain to. So get up and do something about it.
And usually when you complain to somebody, they don't care any if you're complaining. They're just letting you blow off steam, but they're really not listening.
Right.
All right, so all of us have probably done some crazy stuff in our life from various different things. But this question, you can go as personal as you want, but what would you say would be the most outrageous thing you think you've done to either for love or to impress a woman in your life that, probably many of us can relate to doing something just as crazy, maybe?
Well, I think probably for me, I met a person who I cared for very much, and I went on a 150-mile horse ride on a horse that I only had about 10 rides on. And so that was probably not smart, but it all turned out okay. So
you rode 150 miles on a horse for somebody to go see somebody, I'm guessing, on a horse?
No. It was a ride. It was actually called the Billy the Kid ride. It goes from Fort Sumner to Lincoln and goes cross country. And she had invited me to go, and as it happened, I had horses, but they weren't broke. I just sold sold the horses that I had that were broke. And so I had a horse, but I'd never ridden it before. And this was about 10 days before the ride started. And so I said, sure, I'll come. And so I had 10 days to get us out on that horse and then do the ride with him.
I guess that was really a testing of your horsemanship.
Yeah. Or my lack of smarts. I don't know which.
The question: Did you get the girl in the end?
We had a relationship for a number of years. Yes.
There you go. So it was worth the 150 mile, probably somewhat uncomfortable ride at some point, but you still the ride paid off.
It was absolutely worth it.
That is awesome. I don't think I've ever heard anyone share a story such as that. So that's going to be hard for anyone to top it. Thank you. So that's pretty good. So I know we've been talking about a variety of personal things too over the last bit of time here, but I want to go back to a few things in law enforcement I think that are important for many people to think about and hear about. And connecting with the community we talked about, and law enforcement serves the community. And there's a lot of ways that departments try to do it nowadays, and through the use of social media and getting out in the field. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the best way for members of the law enforcement community to really and truly build stronger bridges to the communities that they serve every day?
I think be yourself. There's when I first came out in 1986, there was you are a policeman when you arrive and it's true in a lot of ways. You know, the saying when I first came out is when you arrive on a scene, you have to handle it, because what are you going to do? Call a cop? You know,
That's you.
Yeah, you are the cop, so you have to handle it. And so I think younger officers sometimes hide behind that badge. And I think that what you have to do, and with caution, you are a police officer and you are an official, and you have to remember that. But I think be yourself. Let people know that you understand. If you do, I mean, you know, you can empathize with them. And even bad guys. And I don't know how many I've arrested in my lifetime. I don't sympathize with them. The law's the law. But I can empathize with them sometimes. And you have to have common sense. You have to understand that they're people and we're people. I don't know a cop out there that hadn't, you know, occasionally exceeded the speed limit.
Right.
And it's like, if somebody's doing it recklessly or endangering others or for no good reason, that's one thing. But if somebody's, you know, going 5 over the speed limit, driving up next to them and honking your horn at them, it accomplishes the same thing. I've always said if I could stand on a corner with a sign and say, do not commit crimes, and that would work, that's what I would do. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But I think be yourself. Let them know that you feel you're a citizen. You're a dad or a mom or a brother or a sister. You're no different than them. It's just your job at that time to do whatever it is that you have to do. I've always said, and one of my mentors told me this, you start out treating a person with respect. And it doesn't matter who he is, bad guy, good guy, victim, you treat him with respect. And then you go from there with it. So you always treat people with respect. I've got people that I've arrested and sent to prison I ran into a guy probably 5 years ago. I sent him in prison for 12 years and ran into him at a local store, and he came up and thanked me. And, you know, I saw him coming towards me, and I'm like, well, this isn't going to be a good thing. And,
yeah, I'm sure your first thought wasn't a thank you was coming from that gentleman.
Yeah, but and the thing he thanked me for was not necessarily that I had arrested him, although he said he got his life together and blah, blah, blah. But what meant the most to me was he told me that you treated me with respect. And you know what? I think that's what we need to do. I mean, people can be, let's face it, there are some real bozos out there. But you still have to treat them with respect. You have to start out that way. And you have to let them know that you're a human. You know, I'm going to do my job, but I have to tell you, in 35 years, there's been a time or two that I wished I didn't have to do my job, but it was my job. So, but I think be yourself. Let them know that you're a human and treat them with respect.
Yeah, because if you start off with a lack of respect, you escalate a negative situation even higher. But if you approach it with respect, you almost start the de-escalation process just from your initial engagement without really having to do anything other than just how you treat somebody.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you sharing that, especially, I said, you know, someone who was locked up for 12 years, and the thing that comes to their mind when they see you was not, well, they might remember you're the person that did it, but, you know, the fact that they see you and the person they're thanking you for is the fact that you treat them with respect. You just wonder over 12 years how many times they thought when they were in prison, you know, they were interacting with corrections officers and different, maybe probation officers at some point when they're released. And here the whole time, respect was playing in their mind from what you did for them. That's got to be, for you, the reinforcement of knowing that through 35 years, that's something you always thought you should do. And this is somebody who spent 12 years behind bars and validated what your belief was. And you mentioned, though, if you had an alternate career, it would be a rancher. But if you had to do it all over again, would you still pursue the career in the law enforcement, or would it be the rancher, or some other course of action?
I've never regretted it, Scott. It's not. I guess it's not an easy life, and there's a lot of things that I wish I could change. Being a cop is not good on marriages, especially in all the specialized units I was on. I carried a pager. I guess I carried a pager probably over 30 years, a pager or a cell phone. And so I was on call for over 30 years. And it's not easy on relationships. You miss a lot with your kids. I worked undercover for about 6 years, and my daughter came up to me one time and said, "Dad, are you ever going to go back to work in uniform so I can tell people what you do?"
Oh, wow.
And I realized that there was so much stuff especially with her, that the father-daughter dance, there's just a lot of stuff going to her soccer games and stuff like that, because I was in some stuff that I just didn't want anybody to know I even had a family.
Right,
and
because
so,
the moment they know you have a family, that they become danger.
Right.
In danger from those
and that's a lot of your whole lifestyle is that way. That's why I live out here. That's why I didn't live in Albuquerque. So it's. I think there was a lot of sacrifice, I guess, not necessarily on my part because I chose to do it, but I think my family had to sacrifice a lot. But all in all, at the end of the day, my kids all understand that that's what I did and that's what I was, and all three of them wanted to become cops, and I talked them out of it. But I'd do it again. I absolutely would do it again. It was the best and the worst in my life. So I wouldn't hesitate at all in doing it again.
Yeah, and without going into details of it, but the part you mentioned, I think many people forget that the role of a law enforcement officer is a big stressor on the family members, the children, the spouses, and, unfortunately, that is still one area, even to this day, that marriages struggle with law enforcement. That's just the nature of the job, unfortunately, in the career. And, I wish we could figure out a way to make it easier, but it's, we don't have to go into the details of that today, but that certainly is one thing that is a common theme across law enforcement, that balance is very challenging.
It absolutely is. And if I could say one thing, cops tend to be brothers in blue, or the blue line, or whatever you want to call it. And it's not, it is because you share dangers together, because that's the guy that's going to go through that door with you when you don't know what's on the other side. But even more than that, it's you see things and experience things that I'm not going to come home and tell my family. I can't tell them some of the horrors that you've seen. And right. You don't want them to know that there's people like that out there. And the only people you can share that with and talk to are other cops, because they've been there and they've seen it. Even now, we had some great psychiatrists on APD staff, and they were very into it. They'd been there for a long time, or at least when I was there. I don't know who's there now. But even, I know that I sat on boards and stuff like that occasionally, especially when I was with gangs, and there were therapists and psychologists and stuff like that. And they would try and talk to you about that stuff, but they can't understand it. You can't understand it until you've been there and you've seen it and you've heard it and you've smelled it, and so that's why cops tend to be close. That's why there's, if you want to call it a brotherhood, it's because there's so many things that you just can't tell average people, and they wouldn't believe you if you told them. And so anyhow, I guess I don't want to make excuses for cops, but that is a lot of why we tend to bond together so much, is because in a lot of ways they're the only people that are going to really understand what you've been through.
And like you said, you're protecting your families by not sharing those stories. I don't mean from physical harm, but from mental anguish. Whereas, and even like I said, to think about the things that you may have seen, heard, smelled, gone through, you're protecting them from that just by not sharing it, even though it seems opposite. But, you don't want your children going to bed thinking about that. You don't want your spouse going to bed thinking about those stories. You want them to see the world in a different view, protected, but in a different view, because some of the things that you would see the law enforcement officer, nobody should ever think about. So, you mentioned, lots of different areas you went through your career. Like I said, starting all the different units, being involved, seeing a lot. If you were to say there's one safety tip that you think all individuals in the community should practice, what would be a safety tip that you would share with the community?
Be aware. Probably well over half of the victims are victims of opportunities for crooks. If you're walking down the street and you got your head buried in your cell phone, and you don't see the guy standing there waiting for you to come around the corner, then, you're just trying to you're becoming a victim. Look around, use some common sense. Don't go, trust your gut. If you're starting to go in an area and you're getting the hairs on the back of your neck or standing up, and you're thinking, what am I doing? Don't do it. Just look around, be aware. Don't go off into la la land. If you're going to do that, get a horse, get around and do it there. Find a safe place. But the world is not a great place right now. There's just a lot of things going on that make it not a great place. And when you're out and about, you need to be aware. You need to be looking around. You need to be thinking about what could happen. And they teach you that from the time when you went to driver's ed. What did they tell you? Look for the out. Always have an out.
Absolutely.
It's no different in average life. I taught active shooter. In fact, that's why I came back, was because they were putting together an active shooter team. And it's amazing how when you teach somebody, we've taught hospitals and schools and malls and businesses, and it's like, how many exits do you have? One. No, you've got 5 exits. Why don't you know where they are? Why don't you know how to get to them? Stuff like that. Just be aware of your surroundings. When you come home, that's your safe spot. But just be aware. I think I've taught all my kids that, and it's helped them on numerous occasions.
Yeah. My mind went to when you said be aware in your surroundings. Back to the horses. The horse is, you said, it's a prey animal, and here we as human beings are prey to individuals that see us as easy opportunities. Where a horse is constantly being aware that, hey, we could be eaten. Here, individuals in society, in the community, have to look around thinking we could always become a victim. That self-awareness of all the time, and then what's around you. Well, Patrolman said, I really appreciate the time you spent today. This has been fun, exciting, interesting interview. Going from, scholarships in sports, playing trombones, or riding 150 miles on the back of a horse to impress a woman. That's been some fun discussions here. I really appreciate, like I said, you being a part of this, getting to know your local Leo segment. You've given us great information, personal advice, even some strategies that maybe individuals can utilize to cope with everyday life. So I truly appreciate, again, your time, all you've shared with us, and thank you again for joining the Your Positive Lens podcast today.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on, Scott.
It's been a pleasure. And like I said, maybe someday we will get the retired quartet together and get you to perform on here for us as well, either a cappella or with the trombone. We'll have to figure it out. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you probably again in the future.
You bet. You take care of yourself, sir.
You too. Thank you. Thank you again to retired Master Patrolman Larry Smyth of the Albuquerque Police Department for speaking with us today. His genuine interest in serving the community is very apparent. From the early days of why he became a police officer and helping someone in a wheelchair, to showing the importance of respect by his interaction with someone he arrested and had put behind bars for 12 years. We will also probably now be wondering about the potential musical talents of the next police officer we engage with. Hopefully, it's not while getting a citation. As always, we value your feedback. Go to the comments section now and let us know what you think. And if there are questions you would like for us to ask future guests, let us know that as well. And continue to share your positive law enforcement news stories, as we hope to adjust your focus so you see that members of your local law enforcement community are not much different than you and me. Remember, you can always find places that will share negative law enforcement news stories. But here at Your Positive Lens, you will only find your positive law enforcement news stories. Once again, I'm your host, Scott T. Thanks for listening, and we'll capture you on the next Your Positive Lens.